Hey friends, welcome to another episode of the 10 Laws Podcast with East Forest. I am Said Forrest. Thank you for joining us this week. It's been a minute since we've been back here in the seat, but I was out there on the road in Costa Rica doing a retreat, and then we were in New York City playing a concert at Sony Hall. Thank you to everyone who came out. Really happy to see everyone in our community make that show. And we released the Lovingly album on the same day. How are you enjoying the record? It's a 6-hour record, so I know it takes a little time to dig in, but you can use it as you wish. Let us know what you think on social media, or team@eastforest.org is our email. This week, I'm speaking to Dr. Leor Roseman, and he is in the movie Music for Mushrooms. You might remember him somewhat near the end of the film. Neuroscientist, but he's also working on this beautiful art piece called Ripples that explores, I haven't seen it, but I've heard about it from him. We talk about it here. But Israeli and Palestinian sort of energy between that and healing and reconciliation, but through art, which is a great way because talking about these things is challenging, and sometimes music and art, when you can get into metaphor and emotion, is more effective. And I just think it's fascinating what he's doing. As he mentions in the film, he was doing some ceremony work with groups, with Israeli and Palestinian people, and I thought that alone was so bold and just incredible stuff. So he's just continuing to explore that. If you want to support this work, I'm putting some notes about it in the show notes, and he said you could reach out to him if there's a way you can help them with the show, getting out there on the road or otherwise. But see what you think, and thank you, Leor, for being here. I also want to let you know that we released what we're calling the Journey Toolkit, and that is, if you go to musicformushrooms.com and you scroll down a little bit there, it's basically a whole package of meditations and music and videos and instructions and writings to take you step by step. And we did it as a 7-day process, but you can do it as you wish, and you can repeat the process too anytime you feel like you need to step into ceremony or a journey. And we help you to prepare in lots of different ways, and then there's materials for the journey itself, and then there's information and materials about the integration of that. Now remember, there's lots of ways to journey, with or without medicine. Just your attention, of course, is the only necessary ingredient and probably the most important one. And you can use your breath, or you could use medicine if that feels right to you, of various forms. But it's all the tools to support you around that. So that's why it's called the Journey Toolkit. You also have the ability as an add-on to add in what we're calling the Insider, which is all of the full conversations from the film. So we've kind of separated those out, which makes it a bit more affordable and gives you some choice. But check out the Journey Toolkit. Share it with someone if you know someone's been looking for those kind of tools. We've been developing this work for coming up soon on 20 years through our own communities. And it's a diverse community in the tri-state area of New York. And this is just what we've found has been working for us. And I think it could hopefully support you in some way, in a diversity of ways. So musicformushrooms.com, and you can see the toolkit there. And also, pretty soon here, I'm going to be doing another one of our monthly Zoom councils, and I've been sharing some pretty fun things over on the Patreon, patreon.com/eastforest. That's what I call the council. But I shared the full Esalen ceremony is going to be dropping there, which I'm very excited about. And in the near future, I have to work on it for a bit. I'll be sharing some of the music from my Costa Rica retreat experience. Had some really beautiful music that emerged in those ceremonies. There were 3 ceremonies in all, and it's such a heightened, amazing space. But at least my memory is that some of the improvisations that emerged felt like, wow, this is some new territory and really special. So it was recorded, and I'll get through there, and that's where I get to share stuff like that. So check it out, and you can join for free in different tiers to see what you think and dig around and get access to all that jazz. Patreon.com/eastforest. I am going to be getting out on the road more later this year. Thank you to Susie at Ground Control and Kai who's helping out at Cabin Artists. We're putting some stuff together, but right now, at this very moment, I am back in Boise after what feels like a whirlwind of touring around with the film, a variety of events, and now dropping here for a moment. So I have almost a month at home, which feels like it's hard to describe what it feels like to just try and be a normal person amidst the maelstrom of everything going on in this world. I don't have a lot of cohesive thoughts for you on that. I wish I did, because I'm thinking and toying about it a lot every day, and how to meet this moment that we're in. But what I notice is happening in my life, personally, is sort of a shedding of certain habits that I felt like I've wanted to change for a long time or weren't serving me, and starting to bring in some others that I feel like are serving me. And I don't know if I was just fed up or what, but like simple things like waking up and getting out there on the mat in the morning and doing some stretching. I just made it fun. I was like, we're going to put a record on. We have a lot of records, and we'll listen to at least one side. So that's, it's about 15 minutes or so. And it just feels like a very, not only is it digestible amount of time, but it's fun. I get to like listen to a record and stretch and exercise and get my meditation, my breathing on. So that's been fun. Also wanting to get outside. So I bought a basketball the other day, and it's like, just go to the park, shoot some hoops. It's always fun. Just things you want to do. It's just like, well, support yourself to do them. Like, set yourself up for success, and some other fun things. But it's it's an encouragement for you too to just think, what are some things you actually enjoy that help your mental health a bit, which then helps you be more resilient to this avalanche of information and happening of the apocalypse that we're in. Did you know that? We're in an apocalypse. The great unveiling. What is being unveiled? Well, it's still being unveiled. That remains to be seen. But it feels like we're wanting to be more prepared and ready. It's like, do your calisthenics now. It's something we've been talking about for years on the podcast, and at the retreats, is about inner fortitude, because we need people who can stand on their 2 feet and witness one another and take action, and not just be coming from a place of being like, the wounded healer or just, being reactive and chaos. I mean, we don't need more activists who are wounded. That's usually just more anger. It's like fire breeding fire. We got to be smart. We want to be lean. We want to, be concise. And I think there's an importance of us doing the work we can do now to kind of figure out like what works for you as the best you can to build that life up. But in that destabilization, I know there's a lot of friends who are feeling that their jobs, federal workers and otherwise, and it's rough. It's rough, man. So you keep walking. And just to note briefly that Leor and I started this conversation on one particular online platform, Riverside, that crapped out on me twice, and then we had to switch over to Zoom. So that's what I mentioned about the technical difficulties at the start, but we figured it out. He was a total champ, and you'll hear a little shift in his mic, but other than that, no big deal. I hope you enjoy this conversation with our dear friend, Dr. l.roseman. Thanks, Leor, for doing this. I was thinking about this before we did the podcast, that we haven't podcast before, right? It's like we did the movie and we've seen each other in life, and so I assumed we've podcasted, but we haven't, actually.
We haven't, yeah.
Oh.
So it's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, thank you for joining from London. I did hear that you were in the States, though, recently, because I think we almost crossed paths again.
I was in New York last week, yeah.
I played a show in New York, and someone told me to put you on the guest list, but I was like, I should have just reached out to you directly.
Oh, wow, okay,
yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Next time.
Yeah.
It seems like our paths crossed quite frequently in the last year.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. Do you travel a lot? Are you getting over to the States a lot?
Oh, yeah, I do travel a lot, yes. Not just the States, but I've been traveling quite a lot in the last year.
So, let's get into it. Like, what is the thing that you've been really traveling for? What have you been into in the last year? I know a little bit about it, but I feel like even I'm out of date because so much has been happening. And I've been hearing from other people a bit about what you're doing. I mean, what's exciting you recently?
Sure. So we opened a nonprofit called Ripples. It's based in the U.S. And Ripples continues the work of our peace work with Israelis and Palestinians. So these are research projects that I've done previously, and the one we spoke about in the movie. And Ripples continues this. So the plan is to take people to these processes, but through these processes build a larger ecosystem, a movement through people who go through these processes together. So this is a psychedelic assisted peace building nonprofit, and that's kind of the thing that I've been creating with few other collaborators in the last year. It's pretty much a continuation of previous stuff, but it's really now really becoming alive. And the thing that's really grousing right now is actually a performance we created called Collective Liberation Ritual, which is a performance from previous work. It's Israelis and Palestinians performing together, taking people into like a public audience, into like a process together that is translates our shared ayahuasca experiences into a wider audience, right? So it's this is really something I'm really passionate about right now.
So Ripples, because you mentioned this in the Music for Mushrooms when we were talking that interview, and that was a bit ago when we recorded that, and the world has changed a lot, and it perks up people's ears. I'm like, wait a minute, ceremonies with Israelis and Palestinians, and I remember you said in the film, like, this is not peace work. Mm-hmm. Did I catch that? Like, tell me more about, like, this is, it seems really bold, so I'm sure people want to hear more about, like, how this came to be and what it is.
Mm-hmm. So to give a bit background, like until
yeah, because
sure.
You've been doing it for a bit, right?
For a while, yes, exactly. So I was I'm still a neuroscientist, and doing also psychedelic therapy research, but then wanting to explore more ritual and communal aspects. So I'm Israeli and kind of looking for the collective pain that I experience and what relational aspects I want to heal, and work with those medicine to kind of help in whatever way the pain back home. And so the first research I did was ethnographic research, like anthropological research into the underground scene in Israel and Palestine. Then the second project we did with few other people was to create retreats for Israelis and Palestinians that flew to Spain and went through like a shared process together with a collective intention. So the whole retreat, the whole program, the preparation before, the integration after, were all tailored with that intention. So it was not just a therapeutic, personal, but also a collective healing, a community building, finding insights, creativity, bringing motivation and hope, processing things together. Playing music together, and all of these were part of like a community building and a creative process that people were engaging with. And indeed, after October 7th, that's like there was a lot of questions if whether we want to continue with this, a lot of challenges, but actually the group that went together through process, the people who went together through process stayed quite strong actually since October 7th, and relatively with solidarity. So we had a week after October 7th, we had a Zoom call of 25 people, really Israelis and Palestinians, really showing solidarity to each other. And it was obvious that they were not polarized like many other people that were polarized or still polarized whenever the kind of violence is more rupturous, right? And so in these times, usually the people go into even stronger into their in-group, into their tribe, Israelis to Israelis, Palestinians to Palestinians. And the people who went through this process really, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them like stuck together. And so it felt actually, for me, it felt that after October 7th, that there is even a stronger potential. It was obvious for me, the potential. But also right now, everybody said that like, let's not operate right now. It's too risky, it's too sensitive right now, but let's just build the foundations and the organization for being ready to start something bigger, like a bigger project. So that's where Ripples is. And when I said it's not just about peace, is that I probably said something that's also what we're looking for is to work with those medicines with the purpose of collective liberation or liberation. So sometimes when you just work for peace or reconciliation or harmony, it might pacify certain conflictual voices, but sometimes those voices, the anger, the conflictual voices are what is needed in order to change unjust systems and structures, right? So in situations of oppression or occupation, it's not just about harmonizing and pacifying things, but it's also finding ways of resistance and liberation, but to do it together, Israelis and Palestinians. And there's something in the medicines that, when working with the collective intention, that also activates people. It can also create the bonds, right, and the harmony and the group and the oneness, but it also liberates from narratives, stories, histories, collective traumas. And in this kind of liberatory process, there's an energy that wants to change reality, right? And it motivates people to change reality. And we work in such approach, building such approach, playing, experimenting with such approach.
So you've put it on pause, which is totally understandable, but I'm curious, and this is ayahuasca, right?
Yeah, but now with Ripples, we're planning to, previously we worked with ayahuasca. With Ripples, we're not wedded to any medicine or approach or facilitator, right? So the idea is to eventually work with different medicines.
How does it transform from doing the ceremony work and then into a public performance? I mean, tell me about why that transition, or what that is even.
Sure. So with Ripples, there's an intention of rippling, right? So there's intention of we have these transformative experiences, and then we have the ripples, the movement, the energy that wants to come out of them. And what was clear for me in the kind of previous research that insights are not just like insights or epiphanies or revelations. They're not just revelations. There's a revolutionary energy. There's a movement that wants to come out from many such experiences, in which we want to also change things around us based on whatever experience we happen, right? So there's when this is done in a community, there's a creative force of a community feeling empowered and wanting to create something based on that experience. And a lot of the participants in the project were peace activists, were musicians, artists, grassroots kind of type of people that are already in this kind of energy of creating and being active. And a lot of projects that came out of the project we did with ayahuasca in Spain. A lot of other small projects came out of that. And the energy kind of continued by participants carrying whatever experience they had and bringing it in different forms into their life and the life of people around them. So the archetype, I imagine, is like this, if we could think about the mystic, right? Mystic is like the Buddha. It's the acceptance. It's the kind of everything is good. There's no good and evil. We're all one, right? I'm empathetical to all. This is kind of the mystic archetype. We also have the kind of prophetic archetype of like Moses, which is a bit more revolutionary, fire, kind of activism in some way, but in a spiritual way. There is a moral message. There is a prophet who receives revelation and then works with that energy to bring a certain mission or message to the world, right? And this is kind of the archetypes we're playing with as forms of dynamics and trajectories. And definitely that experiences with this force happened in the shared process together. Once we work with collective traumas together and have breakthrough experiences on the political level, there's a wish to translate them into something that has wider impact than the small group that experienced it together. So the performance, it took us a few years actually to really click and realize for some of us to like, okay, we're doing something that's quite powerful. And we were invited to Medicine Festival to give a panel, speak in a panel.
Yeah, we missed each other there too, by like same thing. Yeah, like hours. Yeah.
Yeah. And we were invited there, and Josh, the landowner and one of the organizers of the festival, was like very supportive of us and wanted us to speak in the festival. And then we said, why speak? Let's try to make something else around the fire. They have like a really beautiful stage called the Sacred Glade, which is a fire with speakers around, really beautiful stage performance right around the fire. And we said, let's do a ritual around the fire. Suli, who works with us, he's the founder of Combatants for Peace. He said, let's call it like a collective liberation ritual. And since from there was like an energy, okay, let's create something together based on our journeys. And in that sense, we created a performance ritual which takes the audience first to grief, kind of goes deep, goes to the collective pains, trying to connect, people from both sides through a pain that is shared in some ways. And then it moves into like a theatrical storytelling. I do storytelling of the ayahuasca journeys we've been together, and I weave like the visionary states into theatrical storytelling with sound effects and music. And then it moves to music of like solidarity and togetherness and kind of almost catharsis, kind of a bit of celebration, but not too much because it's not yet the times yet to celebrate, but still kind of just something that people can connect with. And the performance was great, and we were super excited. And then we decided, okay, we want to create it in London. We did it in a church, and we did it in another place. And now we're trying to take it on a tour. You fundraise for a tour manager or
Next stop,
producer or
Broadway. Yeah.
dramaturg. Yeah, exactly,
West
exactly.
End,
We need
baby.
a trauma, exactly. It's like theater or ritual or music performance, but it's a process, right? And we try to make it participatory as well.
Is there
And it's
is there
yeah.
story in there? Like you said, there's a through line narrative, or is it sort of a collage of songs and story?
It's a process. There's an attempt to take the audience through a process, which the process is, as I said, it's like kind of you can imagine the psychedelic process is kind of going deep and heavy first, and then going from there into something of the together. So there's definitely a process. There's an attempt for the audience to participate. So in the last time we did it in the grief process, every person had a candle, and we created like an altar together while people prayed or grieved when they came and put the candles together. And so there's a process we want to take the audience. Regarding stories, there are personal stories we share. Khanin, she's from Gaza. She lives in Portugal, and she shares a lot of the pain she's been experiencing in the last year. And like the beginning is like quite heavy with personal stories. And then I tell just the story of our journeys together, and that's quite like trippy. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it brings the ayahuasca energy into the space. But in general, it's more like a process we want to take the audience through. Yeah.
So there's a line in the movie where Spring Washam, I ask her, like, do you think we can thread the needle that we need to thread, like as a people, without psychedelics? And she says no. And I'm just curious, given where we're at now, like what role you think psychedelics or plant medicines may or may not play in the kind of intractable conflicts or seemingly intractable things we're dealing with, particularly Israel-Palestine, but in general, it's things are moving so fast and the wounds are so deep. Are you feeling like it's useful, but it's sort of a side thing, or do you feel like this is a fundamental aspect that we need to lean into more? What's been your experience?
Yeah, I believe that what we do has impact and power, and if we grow and have the resources to make it bigger, especially in Israel and Palestine, it's a small place. Projects, just the story of things have impact on people's consciousness, right?
Yeah.
But I don't think that this is like the solution, like, get everybody on psychedelics and like you solve things. I don't think this is the solution in that sense. I do think that within an ecosystem of other peace activists and other organizations and other liberatory practices, it can contribute and fuel and energize a lot of things, or build like mycelial relationships between different organizations, like by people going through processes together. So I see it as, ideally people who want to solve the problem and the intractable conflict, if they put their energy into something, and slowly that inspires other people and that inspires other people, and that's how like an ecosystem or a movement is built. So we're doing our small part, hopefully that others do their small part, and we kind of slowly build something. But I don't think that this is like the solution. It's definitely a powerful, very powerful tool that in the small group at least works really well, I think. The question is how it translates into wider impact. That's the question, because it's hard to scale it up, right? But I do see the power of it. And with psychedelics in general, I see a trajectory of people moving into more the kind of collective, communal conversation. And while, we Westerns have been using psychedelics communally and collectively for a long time, and most of practices are like that, the therapy conversation had a bit of a like too much of an orientation on personal. And I think, that's power important, and definitely going through like inner processes is strong. But you see also a critique emerging in the field that it's not enough, and that the wounds in our society are wounds of alienation and dislocation and disconnection. And then the medicines also can tap into connection to nature, connection to other people, building community as well as part of the practice. And that is also a trajectory that a lot of people are taking right now. And I think this is a step to also then consider like political wounds, right? And the potential for political wounds. So we move from the personal to the communal, and then the next step is kind of realizing the systemic, the political, the conflict, all of that, how the oppressions, in whatever forms they come.
I think this is actually an important thing to bring up too, because do you feel that there's been a kind of cleaving within the psychedelic community, perhaps in the last, maybe since COVID? It seems like it used to feel more like a cohesive, almost somewhat innocent coterie of people. Like if you met someone who was into plant medicine, you're like, oh, you're essentially into this meta narrative about like what's really going on. It's like a spiritual element to it.
Yeah.
And that's still there, but then it turned into this whole like different camps in a way. And now there's sort of like, you've got the Maha side of it, and it became somehow about like politics and vaccinations, and you have people kind of got the bro tech side of it, and it quite mainstream, the corporate aspects of it. And here we are today at a moment where I suppose it's possible on face value that someone like RFK Jr. as the Homeland Health Secretary may supposedly make these changes towards changing policies federally against psychedelics in the states, at least. And I suppose most people would see that as good, but it's coming along with a big division in what you sort of align yourselves with politically. And this is new territory, and I think for some people, it's kind of figuring out like, well, where do we stand, even inside this quote movement. Have you been experiencing, because we're both, moving around a lot into these different scenes from all different angles. And I feel like there's been a bit of a split in a sense, and it doesn't feel like that's helping the momentum, perhaps, or maybe it's part of it. What do you think?
Yeah, I have a whole theory about it, and
Let's
like
do it.
development,
Yeah.
like a real theory, a scientific theory.
Oh, I love
Like,
it. I love it. I love it.
yeah. And it's kind of relates to revelations and revolutions, right? So revelatory events are revolutionary in potential. There's an energy of movement in insights and breakthroughs, right? And there are histories of psychedelic movements, right? So it can be a collective, a small group that come from their experiences and try to create a movement. In the sense, they also move the substance in space. They spread the substance. They're, diffusing it, right? And you can see that in peyote in like late 19th century, and the diffusion of peyote from Central America to North America in like a hyped moment in time. You can see it, the emergence of Santo Daime from indigenous people and mestizo people to a Christian syncretic church. But also there's a movement of kind of going back to this prophetic idea of a prophetic energy of like there's a moments of revelation that translate themselves into a movement. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I think we experience, before COVID, as you say, we were part of a movement, right? It felt like part of a movement.
Yeah.
And now
Yeah.
we kind of like a bit missing the good old days, right? We're like
Well,
we're
like,
kind of missing
yeah.
that energy because there's something in the being in a revolution, it's a big word, revolution, but in
Yeah.
some sense that was the energy, was means that we were a community of people in action, in movement, trying to bring those substances to become more accepted and legitimized, and just also out of curiosity, and also dedicating ourselves to our own experiences in some way and trying to create something out of them. And the egos of people, once they're aligned themselves in a mission, are a bit less, like they're lower, right? It's less about ourselves as individuals. Once they're a group of people dedicate themselves for a shared mission. And every movement, eventually routinizes and stagnates and becomes, especially if it's successful, becomes a status quo. And when that happens, the movement is almost not needed anymore as a movement. It is, and then the kind of the thing that glued us is not as strong. And if you can imagine the beginning of COVID, you can also see that in the beginning of COVID, a lot of money has entered the psychedelic scene, and I think that complicated that
Wait,
things, right? It
are you
becomes a business.
saying
Yeah.
are you saying that psychedelics are no longer counterculture?
I don't know really. They're less, right? They're less, definitely
It's
less.
fascinating. Is it the
And
opposite, do you think? Do you think psychedelics have been co-opted in a way that they are adding to the dominant culture or putting fire onto an Elon Musk in ketamine, for instance,
yeah,
perhaps that plays a role in his megalomaniac. I don't know. I don't think Donald
yeah,
Trump has dipped his finger into the psychedelic well, other than snorting Sudafed.
yeah.
But what do you
Yeah, but
think?
there's a lot of like more, yes, this idea of right-wing psychedelia and
Yeah.
maybe the left kind of like 60s is like, in a way, it's kind of, we feel almost the end of the 60s in some weird way, right? There's something that emerged in this kind of with psychedelia in the 60s and kind of liberatory processes with music and certain political orientation that maybe is even also that coming to some end.
Well, it's
But I think it's
supposed to be the age of
yeah.
Aquarius now that we're moving into. That's what this
Maybe,
is supposed to be.
it's
Maybe
full of
it's just like
surprises,
we got
maybe.
to really break down the old to open up the new, perhaps. I mean, in
Yeah,
that
yeah.
way, we're really burning the fields. And maybe that has to happen.
But it's like I think there's Naomi Klein and Doppelganger speaks about how the kind of right co-opted the liberatory discourse of the left, and it happened in the beginning of COVID. So you can see that a lot of the energy of the left type of liberation, and the left has become kind of weak as a liberatory political agenda, and almost the liberatory energy has moved to the right in some weird way, right? But it's like,
Hmm.
but it's more there right now. The people who are against the system
In
and
voice,
again,
yes, yes.
yes,
In the projection, absolutely. Maybe in actuality, not at
yeah,
all.
yeah, yeah.
But
But
yeah.
the sentiments, the energy,
Hmm.
the kind of passion, the attraction of like the breaking of the system, the almost countercultural has been has become like a more right this discourse. In reality, I don't think those actions are like liberatory, but they speak that language, right? And they attract that energy, and there is a charisma they have for certain people that attracts them because of those sentiments. And I think this is like, so I think when we speak about psychedelics doing that, I think there's also just a larger thing that's happening in which the kind of what is counterculture is not already, it's not counter anymore, and those forces has the mirror image on the right. Doppelganger is a great book to reflect on that. And but with psychedelics, they're more mainstream. I still think they have a counter element. I think that there's like in this theory of revelations, revolution, and how psychedelics move in space. I map a certain movements of like revolutionary hypes in which a substance spreads quickly in a certain population by certain memes and ideas, and like here medicalization has moved the psychedelics like widely, and but then it's kind of stops until there's another burst sometimes. So I think there is something in psychedelics that doesn't yield to orthodoxy in a very easy way. Once we try to create a story out of them, psychedelics are medical substances. That was a story that has been fueling the movement. That story will not hold for long. All those stories cannot become an orthodoxy. They become like a thing, but the substance would create so much like personal, idiosyncratic, liberatory
Magic. Yeah.
revelations,
Yeah.
magic, that would break from that. So I think there is a liberatory quality to them, that they constantly break from they become a status quo, but then they break from status quo eventually when other people start using them and creating new practices around them and having their own visions. And it's hard to maintain one storyline. There's something a bit chaotic in some sense
Yeah.
eventually in this, you know. But movements, I do suspect more movements to become, and it's a long history.
Well, within that, what are, do you think, the boundary conditions or lack thereof, in essence, set and setting, that create a more conducive, healthy psychedelic experience? Because they're obviously not inherently pushing someone in a particular direction of cooperation and collective well-being. I believe they do, but there must be things that stunt those revelations and that experience, because you get people like Russell Brands, or you get people who are essentially just going into like self-aggrandizement. It's almost like they didn't break through. And do you think it's because they don't have the right guidance or not the right container, or they're in sort of a reality tunnel that's technological in nature? It's like the social media in a way becomes a snake eating its own tail. You get into these systems where you're only like told yes, and you don't have anything challenging you in a way. It's
Right.
almost like psychedelics trying to meet modernity, and it's
Yeah.
hitting up against these tools we have like social media or something, or just new media, and it's potentially problematic. What does that bring up for you?
Yes. Yeah. I'll go again, like I'll stay with the theme of like revolutionary or liberatory dynamics, I think, to explain this, but it's just very speculative. But I would just like to stay with this theme here. And Marcuse, who's like a revolutionary thinker from the 60s and before, writes, and he kind of wrote a bit about psychedelics, but in a famous essay, an essay on liberation, he writes how psychedelics provide this like liberatory qualities and create the new aesthetics, but there's also too much liberation, and the too much liberation, you lose the rationality of the structure that holds you, right? And if we lose that, we need to replace it with something. So we can like, if we go too far, liberating ourselves from the structures we're embedded, it's also the rational structures, the things that make sense. And if we don't have the whatever replaces that, it becomes whatever other things around kind of can hijack that. So in the parallel to revolutions, actual political revolutions, you can imagine this kind of tragic human story of like a group of well-intentioned people trying to liberate themselves from oppressive structure just for another oppressive idea to then take that energy and put something else on it, right? Like the Arab Spring had a lot of those stories, right? It was supposed to be a democracy. That was the intention of the people, but there was no planning of what instead, not strong enough planning on what instead, and that allows other forces to come and hijack revolutions and put other things on top of them. And I suspect all this like conspirituality that is very kind of now popular around psychedelics, and people flirting with conspiracy theories and spirituality together, and the kind of chaos that is in social media somehow is more convincing and appealing, relates to that kind of, yeah, you get liberated from your structures and identities and narratives, but nothing is there really to replace that.
Yeah, and people are very tender, and maybe just tell us from like a brain perspective. I mean, the gullibility that happens today. There aren't many guardrails in people's minds about what is truth,
Right.
and what they're ingesting, and how that starts to change the algorithm we see. I've heard that story of like on YouTube, there might be a mother clicks on one about breastfeeding, something about her child won't breastfeed properly.
Yeah.
She's watching this, and on the right, there's another one, and then within 2 or 3 videos, she's about autism and something and vaccinations, and then, within a week, your thinking can change, and all you start to see now is that world of information.
Mm.
And what do you think is going on there? Something in our own brains about the reality tunnels that we end up in, that we build in a way, but then we're blind to seeing
Yeah.
where we are.
Yeah, that's kind of goes to Huxley reducing valve and psychedelic expanding reducing valve, right? And and then a lot of theories, neuroscientific theories around with similar orientation, right? So that psychedelics relaxes our beliefs, like Robin Carhart-Harris. So relaxed beliefs under psychedelics or entropic brain. You can imagine it as a variation of Huxley's reducing valve. So we usually have priors through which we perceive the world, top-down kind of beliefs, and then with psychedelics, that does reduce, and we can experience more and see more. Yeah.
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 I mean, is it
I don't know if it
something?
answers the question. Maybe I didn't get exactly the
Well, we're
question.
just talking anyway
Yeah.
about it. But going back to your the project you're working on with Ripples, I mean, one thing that's interesting to me about it is like coming from the neuroscience background, and you're using art essentially to
Yeah.
communicate and create feelings in people, and through those feelings is inspiration. And there's something that I think a lot about, and I think about Matthew Fox. I had him on the podcast a long time ago, Episcopalian priest who was excommunicated for saying there's no original sin, and he's just a really cool guy as an author and just really expanded thinker and very inclusive. But he was talking about mystical experiences, and that when you have one, that the rational response is just silence or art. I mean, what else
Right.
can you do in response to the
Yeah.
numinous, in a sense? Is that partially your thinking here? Because, I mean, you're talking about this particular conflict that's very close to your heart between Israel, Palestine, and everything that's going on there. And it's interesting to me that it started with these ceremonies, which is already so bold, but somewhat direct. It's about bringing people in a room and various mechanisms about possible connection. And that flowering into an art piece, that meets the public. And I'm assuming there's no medicine technically involved in these public
No.
performances. And now it's just about the art. Let's talk more about that transition into that, or your belief in why that was the best use of your time, in essence.
That's a good question. Yeah, I think, looking at my trajectory also in science, moving from neuroscience, brain blobs, questionnaires in clinical research, then moving into qualitative research, then moving to storytelling, then enjoying a more theatrical approach to storytelling in lectures that I gave. Even before this performance, I started being a bit more theatrical, so in lectures. And a friend told me, "Oh, you're doing a lecture performance."
What
And
did that look like? What do you mean theatrical? Did you have a background in theater, or?
not really. I mean, every lecturer is a bit of a performer, right? But going to your question, I felt that if I wanna, I was very close to my research subjects, right? And going through a process with them and feel very connected to the journeys we had together, that I felt that questionnaires or even breaking this into themes does this disservice. So I started, for me, like the storytelling is the first thing, then the questionnaires and the analysis are secondary. But then to portray also emotions, I realized that like if I do a bit of acting on stage while I experience, share the experiences in psychedelic science 2 years ago, I did it pretty much. It was very clear that I did it for the first time. I also used music recording from the ceremonies themselves in Spain with ayahuasca, and and edited them in a way that kind of grabs the audience and like the audience close their eyes and listen to kind of the music in Hebrew and Arabic from those sessions. It was just, I found it communicates something that I cannot communicate really with words or numbers. And because those experiences are abstract, they're close to the ineffable, let's say, if there's such a thing, ineffable, but they're there. Art is closer to the experience than verbal than words. If it might make sense. You're an artist, right? So it makes sense for you. But it's just closer to the experience. And if we want to stay loyal if I want to stay loyal in communicating my experiences, the experience of people around me, to the world, then art is a powerful
Yeah.
way of doing that.
Amen. Yeah. I mean, that's why I spend my time doing what I do, because I usually come back to part of it's like the exercising the gifts we've been given, but also, how else can you talk about the mystery? And I think music is a powerful way. May I ask, when you say there were songs in Hebrew, songs in Arabic, who was singing them, or how did that work? Tell me just a little bit about the mechanics of. So it wasn't traditional Ikaros. So tell me about
Right.
like how that was working with the music.
Yeah, so the main facilitator was a Brazilian guy. The main facilitator of the ceremonies in Spain with ayahuasca was a Brazilian guy from the Amazon, but non-indigenous, that was traveling all over the Amazon and with other people, and is a very flexible space holding. So his space holding is participatory. He would say things like, "I'm not your shaman. We're all the shaman together, right? I'm not we're all taking care of each other. We're lifting the spaceship together." That allows participation of other people in by prayers, by music, by caring for each other. It also brings chaos sometimes because the group doesn't really know how to hold each other in the beginning. And every group had Israeli and Palestinian musicians in the group as part of the participants. And a lot of people are just good with music, even if they're not musicians, right? So there was just a lot of people brought their selves into that. Now, you can, in Israel, there's already like medicine, psychedelic culture, ayahuasca culture is there for like more than 20 years. There's a huge repertoire of songs in Hebrew, huge repertoire. There's a strong underground ayahuasca scene, lots of like different facilitators, lots of like music that is created already for a few decades. With Palestinians, it's more new, and but there are songs that are brought there, like our prayers or Sufi songs that have a quality of like trance, like in Arabic that can be. But sometimes it was just like celebratory songs that you sing in weddings, and everybody are just like kind of that was also brought into the ceremonies. So some of that had more of like spiritual quality, but some were just like you know. Kind of celebratory music.
What
Yeah.
do you think is common threads in music that is important for the psychedelic space in any context?
In any context.
Well, yeah,
Wow.
therapeutic, personal, groups.
Hmm.
Like, is there a through line or pieces there that you have found?
It's hard, right? We're trying to say what is like psytrance, your music, music, music in therapy, and like Grateful Dead,
Well, let's
what
take pure concerts out of it. Let's say like in the quote ceremony space.
in the ceremony space.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Whether
So
you're by
ceremony,
yourself or a group or in a
okay,
medical ceremony, whatever.
right.
Yeah.
Uh, hmm. It's a hard one. There is something about certain songs with certain frequencies that put people into a process, right? So there's songs that are good in like taking people into an inner journeys, and once like maybe in the beginning of ceremony, you're with eyes closed and you kind of go through something. And there's song, a lot of times there's repetition in them. A lot of songs are with repetition. There's a loop that is kind of create this kind of trance feeling, and it carries like a certain frequency in a way. But then there are songs which are almost hits. You see in those like in medicine circles, there's songs that everybody knows, like the Huni Queen and like Istawata Kayawe, and everybody knows the songs, and it's like a hit of those circles that then brings the togetherness and the joy, and sometimes they come in the end of the ceremony once people just want the catharsis and kind of end the night, in a good vibe. And that's just like it's structured like pretty much like a hit.
Yeah. The
Uh,
ayahuasca top 10. Yeah. The
yeah, exactly,
charts.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly, exactly. I don't know. It's really hard to say what is a good medicine. It's a good question. I'm not sure. I would love to hear your answer on that, actually. What's your
On the
reflection?
most basic level, I think it needs to come from the heart. Like, so,
Right.
and, or I could say the intention of the song. And that is sort of ground level of like, well, it, that could mean like when you're creating, if it's a recorded piece, like, well, are you intending for this music to kind of lead you to an inner space, to the soul, to the heart, whatever you want to call it, versus not? Some people, I know most musicians, honestly, are sort of very, like, my music has no agenda. You know, like
Mm.
whatever you interpret it is fine, but I have no agenda on you. Like there's no purpose to this other than my expression. And
Mm.
I'm not sure where that comes from exactly, because I personally feel very different. It comes from a personal place. I think we all personally do have an agenda. It's for ourselves. And you have to be honest about like, well, what is the place you're trying to reach? It may be exercising a form of anger. It might be it's some sort of emotional exploration that you are doing that particular piece in that moment for. And in the medicine space, there's tons of flexibility, but I think when it has that sense of open-heartedness in a way, now that can be a lot of
Mm.
different musical styles, but you know, it's almost like coming from a spirit of a gift in a
Yeah.
way.
Right.
That is a kind of glue that can like set the stage for something that seems to work.
Right. So there's like something authentic at the moment as well that needs to
Yeah,
be.
an
Yeah.
authenticity to that.
Yeah.
Because look, conversely, let's say your intention is maybe perhaps darker, or you want it to be divisive, or it's meant to like feel like it wants to break something, which is totally valid as a form of music. That might be quite disruptive. Like that same
Yeah.
intention is felt. The psychedelic, in a sense, is amplifying our own antenna to be sensitive. And you're such
Hmm.
in a tender space that you're very manipulated. You can be very manipulated in any
Yeah.
regard. And
Right.
so the music being this central core guide is quite important and critical. Like I'm just surprised it's not talked about more. I still see lots of studies and conferences I go to, even some of them like private ones, and where it's just not, either there's not much knowledge about music, or they don't know what quite to do, or it's like the very last thing they're thinking about. And I would say if you
Right.
look back in history, it was almost the central thing besides the medicine itself.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's still very central to the therapists who hold in clinical trials to have a good playlist, right? But they don't necessarily involve too much in creating it because they don't have the skills of
Yeah.
using music, you know. But yeah, definitely, yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of clinics, like at least more of the commercial clinics, that they don't even think about that. They're just like,
No,
if you
really.
want music, you know, you could listen to whatever you want, or they put on like the radio essentially. I mean, they just think it's
Wow.
just like music. Like it's a sense of a blind spot there. That's
Uh-huh,
not
okay. Wow.
ceremonial at all, obviously.
Right. Oh, wow.
But that element of ritual, let's call it that, and theatricality is another form of ritual in a way.
Right. Yeah.
That is like the third element in the experience of the psychedelic that I believe has been part of the human experience for a very long time, and we are a bit more medicalized or agnostic at times, where we forget about what that intentionality does for us. The
Mm.
way we just say like, I want it to be beautiful, or any kind of little, it's structure in a sense that we're choosing, that is
Mm.
telling our bodies and brains, this is an important thing. This is an elevated space. It's not casual. Like, it's not
Hmm.
just like I play a role in this. I'm a player in this scene.
Mm.
Did that frustrate you at all in the medical scene, or did you feel like there was room to play there, or how the landscape as it
I
stands?
think there's actually like at least from the work at the Imperial College, there was room to play for the therapist. There is what is communicated by research and the research paper, and there's what happens in reality on ground with the therapist, and there is a bit of a wiggle room to some extent, but not too much. You know, it's first of all, it's on individuals, right? This is a strong limitation. But I found that therapists did have room to bring themselves into things. But outside of the clinical trials, much more freedom for sure. And I think most of the innovation in the field doesn't happen in trials. Most of the innovation is a contextual and us playing with context. You know, you say music, but all other contextual elements, intentions, expectations, or containers we build for the experience. Now there's like, experience for ecological activists, experience for Jewish holidays. And there's like more and more variants in the containers that are built for the experience. And this is the innovations that are happening. They're definitely happening outside of the trials. The trials don't innovate anymore. They just scale up and they, to prove themselves. But the creative stuff happen outside.
Proving themselves within a system that, like, there's studies about, does artwork on the wall affect the journey? It's like, I mean, I can tell you the answer. Like, yes, yes, it affects it. I mean,
scientists have like sometimes a very kind of sophisticated way to say things that are obvious, to prove the obvious.
Yeah, but I know like the system itself needs that literal proof to validate and then move on to the next steps. It's just a very slow and expensive process. It just seems like we're in a kind of emergency that requires all the tools. But we want to, you see it outside those systems where it's starting to go down these different avenues where maybe it is less conducive to cooperation. And you start to think like, wow, what are the ways we can support one another, the tools we can put out there that can maybe get things a bit back more on track as far as the use of a psychedelic as a tool. I think music could potentially play a big role in that, or it's sort of like the ceremony itself, but music could be an easy big piece to build that for someone without a lot of education to them, and it's more or less free for them to use.
There's no psychedelics without music, except when in nature, right? Or maybe some people who do heroic doses at home, but like by themselves in quiet, and it's kind of their intention. But most of psychedelic uses are strongly linked to music, right? Whatever ceremony therapy or festivals, it's like strongly linked. The music carries the substance. There's a relationship there that's strong.
So, are you feeling hopeful about life or the world? I mean, I'm just curious.
About the world,
Well, I mean, there's a transformation happening. There's no doubt about that. It's just, how messy will it be, or at what pace will it be, or how much suffering is there along the way. But I feel like you're down there on the ground level doing some things that are like, as opposed to moving reactively away, you're leaning in. And does that bring you hope?
Yeah, it brings me hope in a weird way. Yeah, it also brings me, I see how impossible it is to move the bigger things, the historical movements in our society. But also working on whatever scale and being in the action and the creation to try to shift things, and with people that I love working with and love in general. And there's joy in it. And it definitely brings hope. With the Israeli Palestinians I work with, we meet a lot. We do constantly check-ins with each other on a deep emotional space. And even when we are in despair, we are voicing that and holding each other whenever people are down, knowing that I'm down this week, and then like next week, I hold another person. And there is something, I kind of feel that I'm kind of enjoying my life right now with everything that happens. On a personal level, I feel in a good place. If there's hope for humanity, I don't know. It's kind of fun. It's funny as well. There's something so chaotic, but also a bit funny in our madness.
There's a cosmic joke in there somewhere. We have to hold on to that. Well, it sounds like that it's bringing you closer to that which is actually around you, and that's maybe something, good lessons for all of us. That's very real, right? And as opposed to a lot of ideas in our heads or information sickness that we're receiving from everywhere else. I'm happy to hear that. And are you going to bring this piece back to the States, or what are your immediate plans, or what's 2025 looking like for you? Where will I cross paths with you next?
Denver, Psychedelic Science, maybe?
Okay,
Will you be there?
I will be performing there, not inside the conference, but like outside of it. on the
Yeah, we're
street.
also
No.
planning. We also we're also planning to perform there
Oh,
outside. So
cool.
let's try not to make it in the same in the
Yeah.
same
Well, if there's any way
time.
I can support what you're doing or help in any
Yeah,
way,
that's
please let me
great. Let's
know.
talk about it. We
Yeah.
definitely need like a person who help us to produce in
Yeah.
Denver our
Yeah.
show. If you can connect it to the right people, of course, like they'll pay. It's not a volunteering. We actually need like a good producer that we can trust,
For the show
and
itself.
for the show itself, yeah, for the show
Like
itself.
making the show, like right, sort of like the
No, like
development, or
more
you mean like tour producing?
like tour producing with one production. Yeah, so like stay, finding the right place, renting the sound system,
Tour manager.
organizing whatever
Yeah.
tour like a manager. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
I know
something like
people in
that.
the theater world actually, because I used to be an actor for
All
like
right,
10
yeah,
years in
yeah.
New York. I still have a bunch of friends who are like playwrights and so forth. So, I mean, they know people. It's all one
Yeah,
degree away.
if there's a good person that you know that will also help us maybe to take it on a tour in the US, we do want to take it like Denver is one performance in psychedelic science, but then we want to maybe do a tour in California or in New York, around New York. So yeah, definitely
Yeah.
those connections to the art, theater, music world are very welcome.
Well, send us your deck or whatever or video, and I can
Cool.
pass that along, and we'll let everyone out there know, like, if you know people, what's the best way to reach out to you? I could put it in the show notes.
Yes, so Ripple's Alliance is the website of the nonprofit that does the psychedelic piecework. But I can also send you my email and you can put it in the show notes.
Okay. Do not write Leor asking him about where to get drugs or dosages or, yeah, just spare his
Yeah,
inbox.
yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, man. Well, sorry for the little glitches, technical glitches at the start, but it's always fun to hang out with you. And I love sometimes be able just to record a little bit just so we can amplify our conversations and share them out there. And I hope, we can do it again or do it in person sometime.
All right. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, brother.
Okay, cool. Thank you.